Well, we've got a programme of madrigals. Now, the madrigal is a musical form which started around about 1520, and it started in Italy. And it travelled across Europe quite quickly, and it arrived in England courtesy of a number of different ways, particularly publications that came out of English madrigals, 1580s, 1590s, around there, but also in gifts that were brought across by ambassadors and even kings. So copies of madrigals found their way into England, and the English composers began to become very interested in the form, and it was actually one of the great flowerings of English choral music. And one of the great early composers of the madrigal was Thomas Morley. And I think one of the archetypal madrigals that everybody knows, if they know any madrigals, is Now is the Month of Maying. 1595, Morley produced it. It wasn't altogether his own idea. He borrowed the idea from an Italian composer, Orazio Vecchi. And if you listen to Vecchi's madrigal on which this is based, you can see pretty close similarities. But Morley's Now is the Month of Maying celebrates the 1st of May. It celebrates the rebirth, and there's a pastoral scene here of nymphs and shepherds dancing. We do know that some of the text would suggest that they're not just dancing, if you want to read the text in that way. But it's a great celebratory madrigal.
Now is the month of May, when merry lads are playing. Fa la 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 la, fa la 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 la. Now is the month of May, when merry lads are playing. Fa la 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 la, fa la 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 la. Each with his bonny loves upon the greeny grass. La 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 la. Each with his bonny loves upon the greeny grass. The spring glad, holy gladness, the love that winter sadness. The spring glad, holy gladness, the love that winter sadness. And to the bagpipe sound, the nymphs tread out their ground. And to the bagpipe sound, the nymphs tread out their ground. Fie then, why sit we musing, give sweet delight refusing? Fie then, why sit we musing, give sweet delight refusing? Say dainty nymphs that speak, shall we play barley break? Say dainty nymphs that speak, shall we play barley break?
The second madrigal we're doing is by Thomas Weelkes, and he's one of our favourite composers with Voices of Hope, myself. He was a real character. His madrigals are very interesting harmonically. He was a bit of a naughty boy as well. He got thrown out of his organist's position, largely for drinking. So we like bad boys as well. And this particular madrigal, Hark All Ye Lovely Saints, is an interesting one if we look at historically where it comes, because we're now in the England of Queen Elizabeth I, and composers are looking, I think, to get royal approval. We know that Elizabeth was the Virgin Queen, and the interest in classical mythology, and particularly Roman mythology, leads to a text here in which the goddess Diana is in the text, referenced in the text, and she agrees with love, it says here, his fiery weapon to remove. Now, Diana was the goddess, the virgin goddess as well. So the text, with its classical allusions, is also making contemporary reference to the Queen.
Hark all ye lovely saints above, Diana hath agreed with love, his fiery weapon to remove. Hark all ye lovely saints above, Diana hath agreed with love, his fiery weapon to remove. the seas. See how they agree, the seas. See, your mistress bids you cease, and welcome love with love's increase, love with love's increase. Diana hath procured your kiss, see, your mistress bids you cease, and welcome love with love's increase, love with love's increase. Diana hath procured your peace. Cupid hath sworn his bow for not to break her. Ladies more, ladies more. Cupid hath sworn his bow for not to break her. Ladies more, ladies more.
The third madrigal we're doing, well, the third and fourth are performed as a pair, and they're also by Wilkes. Now, these are really interesting because they take on an issue to do with travel and to do with how much of the world was known in the beginning of the 17th century. The first of these madrigals is called Thule, the Period of Cosmography, and it tells the tale of travelling to Iceland and seeing Mount Hekla, this extraordinary volcano, and the sulphurous fire that comes out of it. And at the end of this madrigal, there's a very interesting change of mood, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But when it finishes, we start immediately with the pair, the other half of the pair, which is called the Andalusian Merchant. And this tells of an Andalusian merchant who is sailing off Africa in the area of the Cape Verde Islands, and on the island of Fogo, he sees a volcano, and he talks about this very spectacular volcano, which is even more spectacular than Mount Etna. And again, after this report of this, we go on to a turning in on the composer saying about how my heart with fear doth freeze, with love doth fry. Love doth fry. What's that all about? And people suggest that it could be a reflection upon the fact that in this great period of travel and all these wonderful things, there was still execution of heretics at the stake. I don't know. I'm not a musicologist. The next madrigal is one of the most famous, and it's by Orlando Gibbons, and it's called The Silver Swan. Now, I made allusion before to the fact that the texts of these madrigals can be read in a number of different ways, and I'm sure that anybody who's listening today who studied Shakespeare will know that there are ways of reading texts of Shakespeare which almost certainly would have had meanings to people of the time which we have to learn about today. So if, I'm trying to make this sound as delicate as I can, so that some words have very different or a double meaning. And The Silver Swan is one of these texts that can be read in a number of different ways. On the surface, it's taking the legend of the swan, which is mute until its final days, its final hours. We have the words swan song from that the final sound that a swan makes. So on the surface, this is about a swan song. The silver swan who living had no note and so on, makes a sound and then dies. That's the surface of it. But beneath the surface, there's a final line which is about there are more geese than swans are wise. So there's something maybe political, socio-political going on in the text. And then, if you want to go a little bit further, we know that this era was one where there's great interest in classical illusion, and the story of Leda and the swan would be well known. The swan was the god Zeus, who took the form of a swan to seduce Leda, and many of the portraits of the time make the swan very clearly connected with the male. So if you then read the text again, with that in mind, you can see something else going on in this text. So we know probably that the educated amateurs who sang this would be aware of a lot more than simply it might hit us on the surface today. Finally, we're going to sing one of the great madrigals from the collection called The Triumphs of Oriana. Now, The Triumphs of Oriana is an interesting collection because on the dedication page, it's dedicated to the Earl of Nottingham. And yet, when you read about it, you will see that everybody feels that it was dedicated to Queen Elizabeth I. Now, there are lots of clues in it that it is actually aimed at the Queen, and actually the collection was made by Thomas Morley, 25 madrigals written by 23 people. And we can see that he was perhaps trying to curry favour with the Queen, possibly because he wanted the monopoly in music publishing. And by putting together this set of madrigals, each of which has the same little couplet at the end, then sang the nymphs and shepherds of Diana, long live fair Oriana. It was a kind of saying, it's almost like sucking up to the Queen a little bit. Now, so we've got that side of it going on. But there's more recent research that says it's nothing to do with her, but it's to do with Queen Anne of Denmark. So whatever, we have this extraordinary collection of madrigals, 25 of them, and this one by Wilkes is perhaps one of the most spectacular, I think, in the way, particularly in the way it treats that final couplet. It's almost symphonic the way it works. And once again, the text alludes to how good it is to be celibate. And, this is really interesting because when you think madrigal, all the range of things that madrigals could be about. We started with Now is the Month of May, that's the last thing it's about. And we're ending with a madrigal which is actually singing in praise of perhaps in praise of celibacy. The madrigal is a great thing to sing. And it was written, these madrigals were written for people who could perhaps read music or learn to read music. It was not concert music. It was music that could be performed in your house. We know from some of the early parts that were provided that they were actually arranged. So you put it down on your table and you would be sitting around the table so that the actual paper that you were looking at was actually looking that way around. For people who are used to singing with bars these days, this was unbarred. And they just learnt their part and sang it. I can't imagine how on earth they did that. I equally can't imagine how it's composed. There are theories about people using little wax tablets and things, but we don't have the full score. We have for these pieces, we have all the parts. And when you get an edition of it, you have to reconstruct it from the parts. So these are really fascinating pieces to do. And historically, they sit very, very important in English music, I believe. This period from around the 1590s, when these Italian madrigals came in, Morley's first works, 1590s, through to some other composers that we haven't even started to talk about today, through to the 1520s, 1530s. It created an enormously important bedrock from which English choral music developed. So we're going to hear the great As Vesta Was from Latmos Hill Descending.
And 3 by 3 together. Shepherds of the tree, the shepherds of the tree, with love and truth, with love and truth, then sang the shepherds, hymns of Diana, hymns of Diana.